scientist.
Yeah, I have a degree in biology. I did graduate work at Cornell with quite a few courses in ornithology, which all helped in my understanding of birds.
And how did you decide to take it at a different level as an artist?
Both my parents were basically artists. My father was a professional photographer in New York. My mother was a painter and a dress designer, and they taught me to look. One summer, as a teacher, another colleague and I decided to open up a wildlife art shop. And we brought consignment work in, and I saw what people were doing at the time. And I said, I can do that, and it looks like fun. And that's what started it all off. I always had the love of wildlife. I always had the ability to look. And I think as far as my sculpture goes, that is what entails in a lot of my art. I like to convey something. I like to convey habitat, which again is a biological background. I like to convey different activities like courting behavior. I've done all sorts of pieces. One even was pre-copulatory cinnamon teal, which I did. And a lot of my work becomes almost an engineering project because they have to float perfectly. A lot of my artwork actually is seen on the water if I want to enter a competition. It's an involved process from original concept of what I want to convey and then to carry it through to the final project.
Let's talk about the materials that you use.
There's basically, which I do, two different types of sculpture. One is decoys. One is it's a terrible name, but it's called decorative, in which it's not intended to go in the water, and it is basically visual. Now, the decoys, originally, I made bodies out of cork, the heads out of wood. And I slowly progressed in doing everything out of wood. The type of wood that I used to use is basswood. It's a very beautiful type of wood to work with, not terribly hard. And then I progressed into something called Tupelo, which is a softer hardwood, but I can get much larger pieces than out of your typical basswood. That type of wood enabled me to do different things. I did a piece of a full-size eagle, which out of basswood would have taken much more laminations. I don't like to laminate pieces. I'd rather use one large piece of wood. But again, after the wood, depending on what I'm doing with the particular piece, I might add lead to weight it properly. I might use bronze rods in order to give structural support. Probably the best example of different things was a bald eagle that I did for a client standing on a dead wood duck, which is a posture. There I'm conveying a feeding attitude. The whole piece was then put on a black walnut base. So there's another type of wood. Again, I wanted to work the contrasts. Now, my pieces also are typically painted, and I use acrylic paint. But there's another section of, or division of carving, which is called interpretive. And there I might use a totally different wood and not paint it at all. Again, showing behavior. I had a large snapping turtle going up after a duckling, which is fairly common behavior in nature. I did a life-size hippo coming out of the water with two cattle egret on its back. Cattle egret would typically feed on parasites on the back of the hippo. If you look at a lot of African videos, you can actually see this behavior. You know, cattle egret on elephants, hippos, any large mammal, and they feed on parasites.
Behind you, I see some of your work. Would you like to talk about it?
On the mantle behind me, I have some antique decoys. These were originally made for hunting. It's very stylized depending on the carver, and they were used to attract birds for the hunter. I also used to make hunting decoys, but I do have, like, I don't know if you can see right over here, there's a small black-capped chickadee, and I have it perched on a branch that I made from brass with rose hips on it. Black-capped chickadees would very commonly eat rose hips. Again, there's that biological interplay. There is a black-billed cuckoo on a branch of sassafras. Sassafras is a shrub slash tree which would typically be on the edge of your woods. It's not a deep forest plant. And that's where typically you find your black-billed cuckoos. Again, interplay. I think those are the only two contemporary pieces, but let me just get something. This is a pied-billed grebe. A lot of people aren't familiar with them. It's not a duck, even though it does swim like a duck. It has lobed feet. But again, you can see that not only is the piece out of Tupelo, this happens to be one piece of wood, the only thing added are taxidermic eyes. There are some companies that will make eyes that sculptors will use, but you carve it and then you have to texture it. Again, something different from hunting decoys. By being textured, we will carve in ripples and undulations, and then we'll burn it with a burning pen, which is sharpened like a knife blade. So it's completely covered with tiny grooves, which will represent the feathers, and then painted, all giving a more naturalistic overall appearance. Each carver has their own style. Many carvers do not put as many undulations in, but I personally see birds where feathers are not perfectly laying down on the bird. It's not smooth, and I like to create shadows, which for me gives a more realistic pose or appearance to the bird.
You're also doing the habitat.
Yes, in non-floating pieces, I do the habitat. The habitat quite often will be made of brass for structural support, could have paper, like in certain ways, the leaves will be made of paper. I've used to make pine needles, fine brass wire. Everything is used to give a specific appearance what I'm trying to get. Many carvers will take a natural branch and put their piece on that. I don't. If I see a branch I like, I will carve that branch as, again, another piece of sculpture where broken branches and everything add to the balance of the piece.
You are a self-taught artist.
Yes.
Did you have models or mentors?
I watched people. There were a few early carvers that played an important part in my whole development. One was a gentleman named Mike Wavercack. I was asking him for pointers when I first started out, and I started back in officially really 1978. And he gave me a suggestion, and I've been doing it ever since. Like once he said, you know, put a little piece of a leg on the bird. So when the bird is placed on a tabletop or mantle or wherever it's going to be displayed, it just adds a little something. And I go from there. Due to where my residence is, I had very little contact with other carvers. Every now and then at a show, at a competition, we talk about different things, but that's about all my exposure. I used to teach quite a bit. I used to teach my students. I still have one student that started out in 9th grade, and now he's ready to retire, but he generally spends a couple of weeks with me in the summer carving because he lives down in Florida and I'm in central New York. I would look what other people are doing, and if I like it, I might try to incorporate something, but you can pretty much identify many of the carvings and who the carver is just by what they convey in their sculpture. That's the same way with my old decoys. I can look at an old decoy and understand and recognize who did the piece.
Was there a bigger demand for decoys in the 80s, or is it the same now?
Definitely. The golden age, I'd have to say, for modern decoys would be the late 70s, 80s, early 90s, where people were just buying them like crazy. Magazines like Better Homes and Gardens started in their advertisements, used to place decoys. And that caused the market to go up drastically. They saw it and people say, I like that. And so they got some. The market is still good for many carvers. Other carvers are struggling to make a living out of it. I would say 80s, it was amazing. There are shows all over the country that would promote it. There still are shows that have been going on for 30 years, 40 years. The big show is the Ward Foundation World Championships. And there used to be a decoy show, which was the U.S. Nationals. Now, one thing, many people won't admit it, but there's so much politicking going on in these competitions. I don't do many competitions anymore, only because I won't play the game. And it is a game. And I've had numerous conversations with judges. I've been a judge in some shows, and some people will accept criticism, others will not. Others will see only what they see in the bird. Now, in judging, you really have to look at the anatomy and everything, and certain things stick out. It's a training process where you see what actually the bird should be doing, or a posture, like if you have a primary flight feather at the wrong angle, you can't, that's a criticism, which is a major fault of a bird. But again, it's a very personal thing.
How does an artist decide on the posture of the bird? Do they go into the nature, they take pictures, they observe them? How do they do that?
I've been a bird watcher for ever. I actually was a teaching assistant at Cornell for a very prominent ornithologist. When you're looking at birds, for example, when I did my bald eagle, most carvings of bald eagles, you'll see they're perched in a very vertical pose. I saw, since I live on a lake, a bald eagle in a very horizontal pose. And I watched it until I finally could see when it started feeding on a duck. And it was a nice pose, a different pose for an eagle, which you typically don't see. And then when I had a client ask me to do an eagle, I said, I would like to do this pose. And he was agreeable. So it took me approximately, well, I estimated 1,500 hours, but it was closer to 2,000 hours of work. I was very fortunate in that I had quite a few clients who gave me carte blanche to put it in any pose that I wanted. For example, courting goldeneye. It is a duck which actually, on the mantle, the ones with the white dot here, those are common goldeneye. When they court, they throw their head all the way back onto their back. Now, if you carve that, it's not appealing to look at. It's fun to watch, but it's not appealing to look at. I would rather put it in the motion of throwing his head back. Some birds are very agitated in their posture in some carvings. That bothers me. I don't find it appealing to look at. I like to do a lot of resting, peaceful birds, or birds doing activities which are still pleasant to look at. I did a common loon, which it floats very low in the water, as a loon will, but I put a small brook trout in its mouth. So as it's coming out, it's holding this fish. It's an activity, but it's pleasing to look at. That's a key thing.
The paints that you use on the hunting decoys, are they different from the paints that you use on your interpretive sculptures?
Well, not the interpretive, decorative. The hunting decoys, quite often I'll use house paint. I'll mix different house paints together to get to the one because it's more durable. I have used regular acrylic paint and it was just fine. After a year's, a season's hunting, you might have to touch up a little depending on how you handle them, but I have no problem really with just general acrylics. But typically I use house paints and I would blend them to different colors that I wanted. But the painting of a hunting decoy is much more simple than, let's say, the painting of a decorative decoy, where you might be doing one feather stroke by stroke by stroke. On a decorative, you wouldn't do that on a hunting decoy. A hunting decoy, you might use a technique called combing, where you put a layer of paint down, let it dry, put another layer of a different color paint, and then take a comb and do small squiggly lines through it, exposing the lower paint. Those little lines are what we call vermiculations. And again, overall effect, but because it's used as a tool, you're doing different techniques.
You're also doing interpretive sculptures and cabinets, poles.
One of my clients was building a hunting lodge, and the designer, the architect, wanted on this one cabinet totem poles. Now the building was modeled after an Adirondack Great Lodge. Totem poles are Indians of the Northwest, but as a sculptor, I was given the right to change from quote unquote a totem pole to my piece, where I took the animals that and clans of the Adirondacks, the Iroquois, and incorporated them, like a hawk, which was a clan, bear clan. I even carved into the piece a false face, which was a ceremonial mask that they used. The poles also included specific plants of either that were important to the Indians or just typical of the area. Like on one of the poles, I had the three sisters, which was corn, beans, and squash, which was a very important food source for this whole general Northeast area. And then I added trillium, which is a common wildflower, spring wildflower. So I did this specifically for this cabinet. Then when the cabinet was done, it was done in Adirondack split wood technique. The cabinet did not fit the client's needs. So they removed the poles. He asked me to intensify the paint on them, and now they're used as an entryway piece for the entire lodge. I did 4 of those poles. I even made the New York Times once with those poles because they were too big. So I was working outside under a tent, and I had 2 of them stolen. I suspect they were kids just having a little bit of vandalism in their heart, and so I had to redo the poles. But it did make a little blurb in the New York Times. Those poles were, again, more on the interpretive side, and it was a fun commission because I've never done anything like that. And again, I had carte blanche. I don't know if I would have enjoyed it as much if I was duplicating something from the Northwest.
What are you working on right now?
I was going to be starting a cinnamon teal. I finished that little grebe, so I'm just in between the two. I have to get a slightly larger piece of wood from what I have in my workshop for the pose that I want to do. But I did one pair of cinnamon teal, and I do like doing pairs of birds, male and female, and let the two positions or postures work together. But the one pair of cinnamon teal that I did was pre-copulatory, where the drake was climbing up on the female, grabbing the feathers on the back of the head of the female. And the tricky part of this, when they were put in the flotation tank, she was completely underwater except for her head, which again is biologically correct. I mean, if anyone does any bird watching and watches waterfowl, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And that was, again, an engineering nightmare to get the two, because they were only, the two pieces were only connected by around that much, the male and female.
You are studying these mating rituals. You need to know exactly when they happen, times of the year.
After watching birds for so many years, it's typical spring behavior. And, a lot of people don't see this, very common in the States. You'll see mallards very commonly all over. But a lot of these birds only do their breeding in Canada. So, you have to understand, and I go out watching for different behaviors. It's like I've never done one, but when you watch cranes, like a sandhill crane or a whooping crane, when they're courting, they do this extravagant dance. Grebes will do, again, different behavior. You just have to get out and look and understand what you're looking at.
And you have to go pretty far in the nature to find them.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, most definitely. I will make no bones about it. When I got the commission for the eagle as a hunter, I also harvested a wood duck, which I could then pose and study the interrelationship of the different parts of the bird to make it interesting. I did a piece of, this was a classical design. If you look at a lot of paintings and sculptures, you used to be seeing like dead animals hung up as a still life. Well, I carved one of those where I had two quail, bobwhite quail, and I had the actual birds that were harvested. If I see birds along the road that are in good conditions, I will start photographing them. I'll adjust them. You can't possess them, but you sure can take a lot of photographic references. And the internet is phenomenal for collecting different references with posture and behavior.
How do you find these birds of prey? Because they are so hard to find.
Not really. Like I said, I saw that eagle right on the shoreline by our house, and I can see all sorts of things. Then you can go to collections of dead birds in different museums or universities. When I did my hippo with the cattle egret, I didn't have any reference for cattle egret. So I went to the Cornell University skin collection, and I would measure feathers and beak size and everything else, and you work from there. Research can mean a lot, which is important for the overall process. As a carver, sculptor, judge, I can look at some things where I know the person didn't do their research. Like there was a beautiful painting of a mallard type of waterfowl. And when you looked at the painting, the nostrils were caved in. That told me he was painting a dead bird. The nostril was not fleshy, filled with blood. So there's all sorts of little things like that, which you have to understand. And you sort of train yourself what to look for.
When you worked at Cornell University, did you do field research as well?
I did, yep. It was back in the early 70s. And the assistant director of the Laboratory of Ornithology, I was working with, and we studied yellow-belly sapsuckers, which is a type of woodpecker. And part of the project was we wanted to find out what the stimulus was for certain behavior. So we actually ended up making little plaster casts and painted them with different behavioral indicators. On the sapsucker male, they have a red cap and a red throat. The female has a white throat. And we found out that the biggest stimulation was that throat patch, because we saw a male sapsucker who had a great territory, had a mate, lose its status because of the behavior with that throat patch. So little things like that. And we grew, as a student, we also went on field trips where we'd go down and see birds which you wouldn't typically see in central New York.
What did Dr. Paul Kellogg say when he saw that you also became a sculptor?
Well, unfortunately, he passed away before I was into sculpture. He was the person who developed the Laboratory of Sound at Cornell. And now Cornell has this website called Merlin, which is amazing for new bird watchers, because if you hear something, you can put it on your phone. Merlin, the app, will tell you what the bird is. So there's a lot of neat things with the technology advancing, which in many ways would have made it much easier for a developing artist who is not familiar with the birds.
When you started in the 70s, you didn't have these apps, so you kind of had to know how to maybe even produce these sounds. Could you do that?
Well, the sounds, no, but back in the 70s, typically I used and carved birds, which I was familiar with. I always liked waterfowl. And so I was out in the field observing for years. And that's how, in the beginning, I only did floating pieces. And then I expanded my repertoire into to include songbirds. And then I had a client who wanted some birds of prey. Probably my favorite piece was a Cooper's hawk holding a mourning dove in its talon. It seems fairly aggressive, but it's something that happens all the time, since Cooper's hawks will stick around your bird feeders because birds are their primary diet.
Did you have decoys that were so appealing that they were taken by them?
Not take them away, but that's how you can attract them. And that's why I personally enjoy, I have a collection probably of 100 old decoys, some dating back to the 1800s. It was a typical tool used to attract waterfowl. They were shot and then they were shipped off to market. Many people made their livelihood by hunting waterfowl, and these people used decoys. They used some other methods also, which again are ruthless, but back then it was all for the market and making a living. As far as some of these techniques, they would sneak up on rafts of waterfowl at night and shoot them on the water. They had guns called punt guns or batteries, which were, they were deadly. They used to have boats which they would have floating wings out, and they would actually put cast iron decoys onto the wings so it would sink it just at water level. So the hunter literally became invisible to birds coming into the decoys. And then downwind, they'd have boats that would pick up the dead birds, they'd pack them up and ship them off to market. Luckily, that all changed with the federal law that banned these techniques, and it banned spring hunting. And now it's all regulated by the number of birds you can take or the time of year that you can take them. It's a harvested product.
Could we talk for a few minutes about the songbirds?
Oh, songbirds. They're wonderful. I mean, they're small, so it's a much faster type of sculpture. Then you have to, of course, decide on how you're going to display it. But the colors are amazing. Waterfowl colors are great, no two ways about it. But if you think of a Baltimore Oriole with the orange and black, if you think about an Eastern bluebird with that gorgeous cerulean blue body with the nice orangey brown breast, I mean, it's just fun. I was offended once by someone saying that the female birds are just brown birds, but they're anything but. There's so many subtle colors. Many times I almost feel like I do like doing a female of the species better than the male, just due to the subtle nature of the colors. Songbirds are fun. And then again, you put it in the correct habitat. I did an Eastern bluebird on a pussy willow branch. And the branch was made out of brass. And I made the little flower buds and then flocked them. You just have to have an imagination as to how you want to position the birds and what you're going to do with it.
Do you still do bird watching?
All the time. Just listening to a red-bellied woodpecker at the feeder. Bird watching is very important. I do it all the time. I have binoculars in the car at all times. I saw an extremely unusual thing here on the lake. And again, it comes from bird watching. My wife was at the window and she saw some birds fly out towards the middle lake and land. She couldn't recognize them. I went over, I put binoculars on it, then a spotting scope. And the amazing thing was it looked like turkeys. Turkey don't land in the water. Well, it was a very windy day, so I marched down towards the end of the lake. Following where they went, I actually saw an eagle try to lift one. It couldn't, it was too heavy, and I confirmed what I said. It looked like turkeys because I actually pulled 2 turkey out of the water that I was watching drift down. And unfortunately, they, 8 birds drowned. But again, you have to always be looking. Bird watching is a very important thing and very enjoyable pastime.
What do you do in winter?
Same thing. It's winter now. I'm still watching them. We had on the lake the other day around 32 tundra swan, which typically we don't see that commonly. The waterfowl are migrating. A lot of the birds are still up north because it's been so mild, but we'll have sometimes a raft of 10,000 redheads, which is a type of duck, and then you'll have some greater and lesser scaup mix in with them and some ringneck ducks. So you end up seeing all sorts of birds, and I don't get tired of it. I have a little blind on the beach, which I will sit in just to watch birds, and even the common ones, which you see all the time.
What are your projects for 2024?
I will always be carving, but as far as project, it depends what commission I get. Due to the time criteria, big projects, like I said, the Eagle basically was 2,000 hours. I can't dedicate that amount of time on one project unless I have a commission. So major pieces typically are done on commission, where Someone will approach me, ask me if I'll do it. I'll take a deposit and I get to work on that. And that's been the way I've been doing my choosing my sculpture since I started. Luckily, I've had some phenomenal clients and still do who will say, I want this or I want that. And I just go to it. But just purely carving on speculation is minimal. But like I say, I've been very fortunate having as many clients as I do. And as I get new clients, I put them in rotation. If someone wants a specific thing for a present, I might change the order of when I do the piece so it will be done for a specific time. But it's not something that happens overnight, what I can do. Probably the easiest little bird is the little hummingbird that I do.
Are you invited to give talks in schools?
I have done schoolwork. I used to be a federal bird bander, and I've done at different nature centers programs on bird banding. I did a couple of pieces for a local Audubon center, but I have not been recently going around giving talks on it, even though when someone asks a question, it just rolls off the lips. And I will, I'm excited about doing this stuff. I'm excited about talking about old decoys, something for any new carver or sculptor, which I mentioned early on. It's the ability to look. Most people do not look and see. If you would take a piece of wood and I asked you to carve a duck head, I could write down on a piece of paper what mistakes you will do before you even start, because you're assuming certain things. And that's one thing where my parents were very, very beneficial to me, in that they taught me how to look. I look at a modern day clothing catalog and it bothers me, the poor quality of the way the clothes drape on the model and this, because if I'd go and help my father on a specific job, wouldn't tolerate that, because he taught me how to look. Same with my mother. And that's what's so important, in that, she was a painter, and you have to understand it. So anyone starting out, the biggest thing is to look, to focus. And some people, even with years of experience, still make the same mistakes. They're not looking. There are a lot of books out on the market which can help any new carver. But yeah, I always tell people, you have to understand also, you are looking at someone's own interpretation of the bird, of what they're looking at, what they want to do. I did an article for, back in, I think it was 86, for a magazine. And in that magazine, I emphasized the undulations in the bird, which would cause shadows. And at the time, a lot of people weren't doing so much undulation, but that's what I saw in the bird. You go and look at some people there, every feather is absolutely perfect and smooth, and I don't enjoy looking at a bird like that. I'll even put undulations in hunting decoys just because I like seeing it. Is it necessary? No. Do I enjoy it? Yes. I have I believe on the website you can see it, where I did for one client a red-tailed hawk. But instead of texturing it with all the undulations and the fine burning, it was done smooth or smoother, like a hunting decoy, which reduced the time. Just picture covering a surface with tiny knife-like cuts, very time-consuming. I have birds that are, I haven't updated in a while, I'm bad that way, that are on the market, which I have since sold and are no longer on the market. There are still some others. There's one piece that I know is still for sale, which is 3 bobwhite quail. I have a branch which is copper needles. They're pine needles. I have some paper leaves. So that one piece encompasses many different things that we mentioned. And again, like I say, most of my stuff is done on commission. And if someone wanted a specific bird, if I have access to it easily, it can be done. If not, I will do research on it. Again, like going to a skin collection at a university or a museum. I went to see a bald eagle, a mounted bald eagle at Syracuse University, so I could get measurements and take pictures and everything else. Now, the one thing I will say, whenever you use a taxidermic mount, you are looking at another artist's interpretation of that bird and their skills. So you have to understand it, because when I was in school doing research, I had to make some study skins, and it's amazing how things will stretch. So you have to be very, very careful with that type of understanding. You are looking at someone else's interpretation of that piece. Basically, if it takes wood off, I will use it. When I did the eagle, which was one of my larger pieces, or I did a piece which fully displayed was around 10 feet tall. It was a huge branch supported by one point, and I used a weather vane spire, and this would literally turn in the wind. I had, again, the behavior of a juvenile bird begging for food from an adult bird. And it gets to a point where the adults basically just ignore the young. And that piece, when fully displayed, was 10 feet tall. So when I'm doing those pieces, those monstrous pieces, or the eagle, I might use a chainsaw just to cut off bulk wood. Because basically, the birds start out as a block of wood. I will use a bandsaw. I'll make a pattern and cut it out on a bandsaw and bring it down. Then I'll use something called a Fordham tool, which is a rotary tool with different heads on it, which are generally carbide or diamond or whatever, to take the wood down. I have another tool, which is called the Micromotor by Geschwang, wonderful tool, which I can use dental bits on. So depending on what I'm trying to accomplish, to take the wood off, to bring it down to the correct size and texture and everything that I want, it can vary. I used a 7-inch angle grinder with 36 grit paper to basically rough out the eagle when I was rounding it. And I had to make a base so the piece would always stay in the same position. Otherwise, as you carve it, each time you move it a little bit, things change. So I like to have my piece in one place. And then you slowly work even that base down. The idea of the burning pen, it's the size of a pencil, very fine tips, different shapes of the tips, all sharpened almost like a knife. That again gives more texture. And then the paint, I use acrylics. Since I started, that's what I had available. Some artists use oil paint, but it's not just painting the bird a color. It's layer upon layer upon layer of paint, which gives you depth. Now, I know some people use an airbrush. I don't particularly like the use of an airbrush. If anything, I might use it as a quick base coat just to block out colors. But again, it's how you learn to carve and produce what you want and what appeals to you. I don't know. I've been told I'm a fast carver. Sometimes wouldn't realize that. My painting tends to be, I think, a little bit slower because I try to do these different layers. But again, that's what I see and the effect. You can't just paint the bird one color. You have to paint it layer upon layer upon layer, which gives interest and depth to the whole piece. You know, if you have a bird like a little bufflehead, which is a duck, the side basically is white, the back is black. If you look at the bird from a distance, quite often the head will be black and white. And some people say, it's just a black and white bird, but it's not. There's so many gorgeous colors in there that you just have to build up. So, you know, depending on what you're trying to achieve is what you use. There are a lot of great chainsaw artists out there, but it's something that doesn't interest me, even though I will use a chainsaw to block off big chunks of wood. And if I make a branch, for that one piece of the 2 red-tailed hawks, I had to take huge pieces of basswood that were killed and dried down to 13% moisture content, and then I had to join them and then carve the branch from that. For the client, what I did is I actually made a book of the whole process from the raw wood, which I had to laminate and then slowly work down the whole thing. And it shows the entire technique from beginning to end with the base, with everything, and it explains it. So I've done that. That was the piece. And just to show you again, like there it is in the works. And I go all the way through. So it shows everything. And then in the back, it showed the final piece. Like there are sections of where I wanted to show even how I have the talons into the wood duck. There is the overall piece. And that is life size, so it's fairly large. So like in here, you can see the base that I made out of black walnut. You can see the position of the wood duck. And it's just one of those, I don't want to call it a how-to, but it's how I did it. You have to be, at least for my stuff, I like people to have a relaxed image of it. Even the eagle, there's some people think it's morbid, but it's not. It's life. Everything eats. When I did the pre-copulatory cinnamon teal, I had one little old lady say, "Oh, that's disgusting," because she was offended by what was taking place. But that's life.